The Valkyrie scout ship moved through the darkness of space like a predator hunting for prey, and Commander Zethrix watched the small blue planet grow larger on his viewing screen with cold satisfaction in his compound eyes. His species had conquered 17 star systems in the past 100 cycles, and not a single species had ever managed to stop them or even slow them down, which made Zethrix confident that this small human colony would be no different from all the others they had harvested before. The Valkyrie were an insectoid race with hard black shells and 6 limbs that clicked against metal floors wherever they walked. And they had built their entire civilization on a simple belief that all other life forms existed only as resources to be used and discarded when empty. "Commander, we have completed our scans of the human settlement," reported his second officer, a younger Valkyrie named Kethra, who had proven herself useful in previous harvest operations. "Tell me what you have found," Zethrix commanded as he turned his triangular head toward her. "The colony is called New Eden, and it contains approximately 12,000 humans living in a valley near fresh water sources. And most importantly, there is a large educational complex where they keep their young ones separated from the adults. During daylight hours, Zethrix made a clicking sound that indicated pleasure among his kind, because the young ones were always the most valuable resources, and their neural patterns were far more adaptable than adult brains for integration into Valkyrie biocomputer networks. "How many young ones are there?" he asked. "Our scans indicate approximately 2,000 human children between the ages of 5 and 15 standard Earth years, and they are all gathered in one location, which will make collection extremely efficient." The commander's mandibles spread apart in what passed for a smile among the Valkyrie, and he immediately began forming his plan for the harvest that would take place when darkness fell over the human settlement. The Valkyrie had learned long ago that most species were less alert during their sleep cycles, and humans were no exception to this rule, which made night operations the most successful approach for collecting resources without unnecessary resistance. "Prepare the collection pods and alert the processing teams on the main ship," Zethrix ordered. "We will begin the harvest at midnight local time, and we will be gone before their sun rises again." "What about the adult humans, Commander?" Kethra asked. "Should we collect them as well for labor purposes?" "No. Adult humans are inefficient. Workers and their neural patterns are too rigid for our biocomputers. So we will leave them behind as they serve no purpose for the Dominion." Kethra tilted her head in what might have been confusion. "Will they not attempt to pursue us or seek revenge for taking their young?" Zethrix laughed, which sounded like stones grinding together. "The humans are a weak and emotional species who waste their energy on feelings and attachments. And once we take their children, they will cry and mourn and do nothing else, because that is what weak species do." He turned back to the viewing screen, where the lights of New Eden twinkled in the darkness below them. Besides, what could they possibly do against the Valkyrie Dominion with their primitive technology and small population scattered across a few dozen worlds? That night, the Valkyrie descended upon New Eden like shadows falling from the sky, and their collection pods moved silently through the streets while the humans slept peacefully in their homes, unaware of the horror that was about to change their lives forever. The school complex was their primary target, and the Valkyrie soldiers moved with practiced efficiency as they cut through security systems and disabled the few guards who tried to stop them. Because the humans had never faced a threat like this and were completely unprepared, children were taken from their beds in the dormitories, some crying out for their parents, while others were sedated before they could make a sound. And within 2 hours, the Valkyrie had loaded all 2,000 young humans into their collection pods. Sarah Chun was 7 years old, and she remembered waking up to see a monster with black shell and too many arms standing over her bed. And she screamed for her mother before something cold pressed against her neck, and the world went dark. Marcus Williams was 12, and he tried to fight back when the aliens grabbed his younger sister Emma, but a Valkyrie soldier struck him across the face and dragged both children away while their parents slept in a house just 3 blocks away. Never knowing what was happening, by the time the sun rose over New Eden, the Valkyrie ships were already leaving the atmosphere, and the adults of the colony woke to find their children simply gone, vanished in the night as if they had never existed. At all, the screaming began when parents discovered empty beds. And soon the entire colony was searching desperately for their young ones, calling out names that would never be answered, and checking hiding places that were all empty. Colonial Governor James Morrison stood in the ruins of the school complex and felt his heart break into a million pieces as he understood what had happened. Because the security footage showed everything in horrible detail, showing alien creatures carrying human children like cargo. "Who did this?" whispered Elena Morrison, the governor's wife, as tears streamed down her face. "The signature matches a species called the Valkyrie," answered the colony's chief scientist with a trembling voice. "They are known to other alien races as harvesters, who take living beings and use them as components in their biological technology." Governor Morrison felt something change inside him at that moment. Something that went beyond grief and beyond rage to a cold and terrible place that he had never known existed within his soul. He walked to the communication center and sent a message on the emergency channel that would reach Earth within hours. And his message was short because there was nothing else that needed to be said. "They took our children on the Valkyrie ship." Commander Ethrix reviewed the successful harvest and congratulated his crew on their efficiency, never once considering that he had just made the worst mistake in the history of his species. What the Valkyrie did not understand, what they could not possibly comprehend with their cold and calculating minds, was that humanity had an unspoken rule written into the very core of their civilization since the beginning of their existence. You do not touch the children, and anyone who broke that rule would learn exactly what humans were capable of when everything they loved was threatened. Because the Valkyrie had just awakened something ancient and terrible that had been sleeping inside humanity for thousands of years. The harvest was complete, but the reckoning was only beginning. The message from New Eden reached Earth in 6 hours, and within minutes it had spread across every continent and every nation, carried by news broadcasts and social media until there was not a single human alive who did not know what had happened to the children of that distant colony. Parents held their own children closer that night and wept for the families on Kepler 442b. And politicians gave angry speeches demanding action, while ordinary people stood in the streets with candles and signs that asked the same question over and over again. How could this happen? The Galactic Council, which governed the interactions between the many species of the known galaxy, received humanity's formal notification of the attack 3 days after the harvest, and they watched with mild curiosity as the human ambassadors presented their case. Before the assembled representatives, Ambassador Catherine Wells stood before the council with eyes that were red from crying, but her voice remained steady as she described the attack, showing images of empty beds and grieving parents and security footage of Valkyrie soldiers carrying children away like packages. "We demand that the Council take action against the Valkyrie Dominion for this unprovoked attack on our colony and the kidnapping of 2,000 human children," she said. The Valkyrie ambassador, a tall insectoid named Drethox, responded with clicks and buzzes that the translator converted to words. "The Valkyrie Dominion has done nothing wrong according to galactic law, because we simply harvested unclaimed resources from an unprotected world. And if the humans wish to protect their offspring, they should have built better defenses." Several council members nodded at this, because the law of the galaxy was harsh and favored the strong over the weak, and humanity was still considered a young and minor species that had not yet earned respect among the older civilizations, We asked the council to mediate the return of our children, Ambassador Wells said, her hands gripping the podium so hard that her knuckles turned white. The council does not interfere in disputes between species regarding resource acquisition, the chairman replied. A large reptilian being called a Torvin, who had seen many such complaints over his long life. You may file a formal protest, which will be reviewed in the standard time frame of approximately 20 standard years. Ambassador Wells stared at the council for a long moment, her eyes moving from face to face across the assembled representatives of dozens of species. And then she did something that no one expected. She smiled. Very well, she said quietly. I understand the council's position perfectly. Then she gathered her materials and walked out of the chamber without another word, followed by every member of the human delegation. And within hours, every human ambassador across the galaxy had returned to their ships and departed for Earth. The council members looked at each other in confusion, because they had expected crying and begging and desperate offers of tribute, which is what other weak species did when the strong took what they wanted. What do you think they will do? Asked a small furry ambassador from the Kethari species. Nothing. The Valkyrie ambassador replied with confidence. Humans are emotional creatures who will waste their energy on grief and anger. And in a few months they will accept what has happened and return to trade with us as if nothing ever occurred. Because that is what weak species always do. But Ambassador Drethox was wrong. So terribly wrong for 3 standard months. Humanity went completely silent, and no human ship left the Sol system. And no human message was sent to any other species. And no human responded to any attempt at communication. The galaxy watched and waited, and eventually decided that the humans had simply accepted their loss and were mourning in their own strange emotional way, which seemed typical of such a young and primitive species. Trade partners who relied on human goods grew frustrated and then concerned, and some even sent ships to investigate. But they were turned away at the edge of the Sol system by automated defense platforms that had not existed before. What are they doing in there? The Kethari ambassador asked during a council meeting. Probably building monuments to their dead and writing sad poems about their lost children, the Valkyrie ambassador joked. Then several council members laughed at the thought. But deep within the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, something very different was happening. Something that would change the galaxy forever. Every shipyard in human space was working at maximum capacity, building vessels that were larger and more powerful than anything humans had ever constructed before. And workers who had never held a weapon were now learning to fight, while scientists, who had devoted their lives to peace, were now designing instruments of destruction. Admiral Helena Vance stood in the command center of the massive space station called Unity, watching construction reports scroll across her screens as thousands of ships took shape in the darkness around her. She was 63 years old and had served in the human space fleet for 40 years. And she had 3 children and 7 grandchildren who were her entire reason for living. And one of those grandchildren was an 8-year-old boy named Marcus, who had been taken from New Eden Admiral. We have completed construction of the gravity pulse weapons, reported her chief scientist, a young woman named Dr. Sarah Kim, who had not slept more than 4 hours a night since the harvest. How many ships can we arm with them? Helena asked. All of them, Admiral. All 15,000 vessels will carry weapons capable of collapsing matter into itself. Helena nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving the screens that showed the growing fleet. And the faster-than-light engines? The new drives will allow us to reach Valkyrie space in 3 days instead of 3 months. And we have equipped every ship with the upgraded technology around her. Officers and soldiers moved with purpose and determination. And not one of them complained about the long hours or the difficult work, because every single person in that station had seen the faces of the missing children. And every single person had sworn the same silent oath. Admiral, said her communications officer. "We have received another message from the Galactic Council, asking about our intentions and requesting that we resume normal diplomatic relations." "Delete it," Helena replied without hesitation. The Volcari ambassador specifically asked if we intend to file any additional protests through official channels. Helena turned to face her officer, and her eyes held a darkness that made even hardened soldiers step back. "Send them this reply. We are not filing a protest, and we are not negotiating, and we are not accepting mediation, because we are coming for our children, and anyone who stands in our way will learn what happens when you take what belongs to humanity." The message was sent, and the galaxy finally began to understand that they had made a terrible mistake in dismissing the humans as weak and emotional, because the humans were not mourning their children. They were preparing to get them back, and nothing in the known universe would be able to stop them. Officer Krelvax was bored as he sat at his monitoring station on the outer edge of Volcari space, watching the same empty section of stars that he had watched for the past 3 years without ever seeing anything interesting. Border duty was considered the worst assignment in the Volcari military because nothing ever happened out here, and ambitious officers avoided it like a plague, while only the unlucky or the incompetent ended up staring at screens that never showed anything worth reporting. He was about to take his meal break when his screen suddenly lit up with more contacts than he had ever seen in his entire career, and his 4 compound eyes went wide as he tried to count the approaching vessels. "What in the name of the first hive is that?" he whispered to himself. The computer calculated the approaching fleet at approximately 15,000 ships, and they were moving faster than any vessels Krelvax had ever seen, crossing distances that should have taken months in mere hours. He immediately activated his communication array to send a warning to the homeworld, because even though the Volcari Dominion had a powerful military, 15,000 enemy ships was a force that demanded attention from the highest commanders. Volcari Command. "This is Border Station 12, reporting an emergency situation," he began, his voice trembling slightly as the fleet grew closer on his screens. "We have detected a massive fleet approaching from the direction of human space, and they appear to be heading directly for the core systems." He never finished his transmission. One moment his station was floating peacefully in space, and the next moment it simply ceased to exist, crushed into a point smaller than an atom by a gravity pulse weapon that the humans had designed specifically for this war across the border region. 23 other monitoring stations disappeared in the same instant, and the Volcari Dominion received no warning of what was coming because there was no one left alive to send the message. Admiral Helena Vance stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Un's Retribution, and watched as her fleet crossed into enemy territory without slowing down. And her face showed no emotion as station after station winked out of existence on her tactical display. "All border defenses have been eliminated, Admiral," reported her tactical officer. "The path to the first colony world is clear. Maintain formation and continue on course," Helena ordered, "and begin broadcasting our message on all Volcari frequencies across Volcari space." Every communication device suddenly carried the same words, spoken in the clicking language of the insects and repeated over and over again. "Where are the children?" Commander Zethrix received the transmission while aboard his ship near the Volcari homeworld, and for the first time in his long military career, he felt something that might have been fear crawling up his shell. "Impossible," he muttered to his second officer Kethra. "The humans cannot have built such a fleet in only 3 months, because our intelligence said they barely had 1,000 ships in their entire military." "Their intelligence was clearly wrong," Kethra replied, her voice carrying an edge that suggested she was reconsidering her opinion of their commander's wisdom. "The first Volcari colony to fall was a world called Threxnal, an industrial center that produced weapons and ships for the Dominion military. And the humans did not bother with diplomacy or demands for surrender. They simply appeared in orbit and began systematically destroying every military installation and every factory on the planet, using weapons that the Valkyrie scientists could not even understand. And within 6 hours, the colony had been reduced from a military powerhouse to a helpless world with no defenses. But the humans did not kill civilians, which confused the Valkyrie commanders, who had expected genocide instead. They destroyed only the tools of war and left the population alive, which seemed like weakness until the Valkyrie realized that the humans wanted witnesses. They wanted survivors who would spread the word about what was coming. Colony after colony fell in the same pattern. As the human fleet moved through Valkyrie space like a wave of destruction that could not be stopped. And each world received the same broadcast over and over again. Where are the children? The Galactic Council convened an emergency session when they learned what was happening. And the chamber was filled with frightened ambassadors who had never seen anything like this in their lifetimes. This is unprovoked aggression. The Valkyrie ambassador screamed, his mandibles clicking furiously. The council must intervene and stop this attack on a sovereign member species. The human seat remained empty, but a small data crystal had been left on the table, and when the chairman activated it, a holographic image of Ambassador Catherine Wells appeared. "You watched the Valkyrie take our children, and you did nothing," she said, her voice calm and cold. "You told us to file a protest and wait 20 years while our children were being used as components in alien machines. So now we are handling this matter ourselves." The hologram leaned forward as if looking directly at each ambassador in turn. "Stay out of our way. And this will not concern you, but if any species attempts to interfere with our mission to retrieve our children, they will be treated as enemies of humanity. And we have enough weapons for everyone." The hologram flickered and died, and the council chamber remained silent for a very long time. What should we do? The Galactic ambassador finally asked the chairman, old and wise enough to recognize when a situation was beyond his control. Made a decision that would be remembered for centuries. "We do nothing," he said slowly. "The Valkyrie chose to harvest human children, and now they face the consequences of that choice. And any species foolish enough to involve themselves in this conflict deserves whatever happens to them." The Valkyrie ambassador screamed in outrage and demanded assistance. But not a single council member moved to help him. Meanwhile, the human fleet continued its advance toward Valkyrie Prime, and Commander Zethryx finally understood that he had awakened something terrible when he ordered the harvest of New Eden. He had thought humans were weak because they cared about their children. He had been completely wrong. Their love for their children was not their weakness. It was the source of their greatest and most terrible strength. The human fleet arrived at Valkyrie Prime on a day that would be remembered in galactic history as the moment when everything changed. And Admiral Helena Vance looked down at the insectoid homeworld with eyes that held no mercy and no doubt. 15,000 human warships surrounded the planet in a ring of steel and fire, their weapons charged and ready, while below them 4 billion Valkyrie looked up at the sky and understood for the first time what it meant to be helpless. "Admiral, we have located the processing facility where the children are being held," reported her intelligence officer. "It is located beneath the capital city in an underground complex, approximately 2 kilometers below the surface. What is their condition?" Helena asked. Though she feared the answer, the officer hesitated before responding. And that hesitation told Helena everything she needed to know before he even spoke the words. 847 children are still alive, but they have been partially integrated into the Valkyrie biocomputer network, which means their neural patterns have been connected to alien technology and they are being used as processing units. Helena closed her eyes and gripped the arms of her command chair so hard that the metal bent beneath her fingers. And around her, the bridge crew went silent as they absorbed the horror of what they were hearing. Can they be saved? She asked quietly. Our medical teams believe that most of the children can be safely disconnected if we act quickly. But every hour that passes reduces their chances of recovery. And some of them may have already suffered permanent neurological damage. 1,153 children had died during the 3 months since the harvest. Used up and discarded like batteries when their neural patterns degraded beyond usefulness. And their small bodies had been disposed of like garbage in recycling vats beneath the processing facility. Alana thought of her grandson, Marcus, and prayed silently that he was among the survivors. Though she knew that even survival might mean a lifetime of struggle to recover from what had been done to him. Begin the ground assault, she ordered. I want those children out of there within 12 hours. And I do not care how many Valkyrie have to die to make that happen. The dropships fell from the sky like metal rain, carrying 10,000 of humanity's finest soldiers directly into the heart of the enemy capital. And they did not come with negotiations or demands. They came with weapons and fury, and a determination that terrified everyone who witnessed it, Sergeant. Maria Santos was the first human to breach the walls of the processing facility. And what she saw inside made her stop in shock. Despite 20 years of combat experience, children floated in glass tubes filled with green liquid. Their eyes closed and their heads connected to machines by dozens of cables that pulsed with sickly light. And their small faces showed expressions of pain even in their unconscious state. Dear God, she whispered as she counted the tubes stretching into the darkness. Keep moving, ordered Lieutenant James Chun, who had lost his own daughter in the harvest and now fought with a cold precision that scared even his fellow soldiers. We have to secure this area before the medical teams can begin extraction. The Valkyrie guards fought back with everything they had, because they knew what the humans would do if they reached the children. And the battle for the processing facility became the bloodiest engagement of the entire war. Soldiers died on both sides as the humans pushed deeper into the underground complex, clearing room after room in a desperate race against time. And every step forward cost them blood and lives that could never be replaced. But they did not stop. They could not stop because somewhere in that nightmare of glass tubes and alien machinery, 847 human children were waiting to be saved. And no force in the universe was going to prevent their rescue commander. Zethrix watched the battle from his command center and realized that his forces were losing despite their numerical advantage, because the humans fought with a ferocity that seemed almost supernatural, taking wounds that should have been fatal and continuing to advance anyway. In desperation, he activated his communication system and broadcast a message to the human fleet. Admiral Vance, this is Commander Zethrix of the Valkyrie Dominion, and I am prepared to negotiate the release of the remaining human children in exchange for your immediate withdrawal from our space. The response came quickly, and Helena's voice was colder than the void of space itself. You are not in a position to negotiate, Commander, and I am not interested in your terms. But I have the children, Zethrix protested. If you continue your attack, I cannot guarantee their safety. Helena smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing the Valkyrie commander had ever seen. Then let me make you a counteroffer, Commander, and you should listen very carefully because I will only say this once. She leaned forward, her eyes burning with a rage that had been building for 3 months. You will deliver every surviving child to the following coordinates within 12 hours, unharmed and disconnected from your machines. And in exchange, I will not immediately begin reducing your colony worlds to ash. That is not acceptable. Zethrix replied. I was not finished, Helena interrupted. For every hour that you delay past my deadline, I will destroy one of your colony worlds. And I will start with the ones where your own offspring are being raised. Because I want you to understand exactly what it feels like to have your children taken from you. Zethryx felt his exoskeleton crack under the pressure of his own muscles as he processed her words. You would kill innocent Velkari children to avenge your own. No, Helena replied. I would burn your entire civilization to ashes and salt the ground where it stood. If that is what it takes to bring our children home, and the only reason your species still exists is because I am giving you one chance to do the right thing. She paused, letting her words sink in. 12 hours, Commander. And not a minute more. The children were delivered in 6 hours. The medical teams worked frantically to disconnect them from the alien machines. And doctors who had trained their entire lives for this moment wept as they freed small bodies from glass tubes and carried them to waiting medical ships. Marcus Vance, Admiral Helena's grandson, was among the survivors, though his eyes held a haunted look that would take years to fade. And when he saw his grandmother's face on the screen of the medical ship, he began to cry for the first time since his capture. I knew you would come, he said through his tears. I told the other kids that our people would come for us, and they did not believe me, but I never stopped believing. Helena watched her grandson through the screen and felt something in her chest that was both pain and joy mixed together in equal measure. We will always come for you, she said softly. No matter how far you are taken or how long it takes us to find you, we will always come. Because that is what family does. But even as the children were being evacuated, the human fleet remained in position around Volcari Prime. And Admiral Vance was not finished with the species that had dared to touch humanity's most precious treasure. The galaxy had expected the humans to leave once they recovered their children. The galaxy was wrong. Commander Zethryx stood in his command center and watched the human medical ships depart with the surviving children. And for a brief moment, he allowed himself to believe that the nightmare was finally over, that the humans would take their young and leave his people in peace. He was wrong. The human fleet remained in position around Volcari Prime, their weapons still charged and ready, and Admiral Helena Vance's face appeared on every communication screen across the planet. Commander Zethryx, she said, her voice carrying across the entire world. I want you to look outside and see what is waiting in your sky. Zethryx looked up through the transparent dome of his command center and saw the human ships hanging in the darkness like stars of death. So many of them that they blocked out the actual stars behind them. The children are safe now, he replied, trying to keep his voice steady despite the fear that crawled through his body. You have what you came for, so there is no reason to continue this conflict. You misunderstand the situation. Commander, Helena replied, we did not come here only to rescue our children. We came here to teach the galaxy a lesson that will never be forgotten. What lesson could possibly require more destruction than you have already caused? Zethryx demanded, his anger temporarily overcoming his fear. The lesson is simple, Helena said. Every species in this galaxy will learn what happens when you harm a human child. And your people will be the example that teaches them. This is genocide, Zethryx screamed. You cannot destroy an entire species for the actions of a few, because the Galactic Council will never allow it. The Galactic Council stood by while you harvested our children and told us to file a protest and wait 20 years. Helena replied coldly. They have no authority over us anymore, and they know better than to interfere. She paused and leaned forward, her eyes meeting his through the screen. But you are wrong about one thing, Commander, because we are not going to destroy your species, and we are not going to commit genocide, because that would make us no better than you. Zethryx felt confusion mixing with his fear. Then what do you intend to do? We are going to do something worse, Helena said. We are going to make sure you never forget. Over the next 30 days, the human fleet systematically dismantled the Volcari civilization while the entire Galaxy watched in horrified fascination. They did not kill civilians or bomb cities in the rubble, but instead they destroyed everything that made the Valkyrie a spacefaring species, targeting military installations and shipyards and factories and research facilities with surgical precision. Every warship was reduced to debris. Every weapons factory was melted to slag. And every piece of advanced technology was stripped away layer by layer until the Valkyrie were left with nothing but the most basic tools for survival. Scientists who had spent their lives developing the biocomputer systems that use living beings as components were arrested and taken away to face human justice. And their laboratories were destroyed so completely that not a single piece of equipment remained. You are setting us back thousands of years, Zethrix protested during one of his many communications with the human admiral. That is precisely the point, Helena replied. You will have plenty of time to think about what you did while you rebuild your civilization from the ground up. When the dismantling was complete, the humans constructed something that would ensure the Valkyrie never forgot their punishment. An automated defense grid that surrounded the entire Valkyrie home system. This grid will destroy any Valkyrie vessel that attempts to leave your system or any advanced technology that you try to develop. Helena explained, you are confined to your home world until we decide you have learned your lesson, which may take centuries or may take forever. You cannot imprison an entire species, Zethrix said. Though his voice held no conviction anymore. We just did, Helena replied. And every other species in the galaxy is watching. The final act of humanity's justice was a monument that they erected in the center of the Valkyrie capital. A massive stone pillar that rose 100 meters into the sky. And carved into its surface in 1,000 different languages was a simple message. This is what happens when the human fleet finally departed from Valkyrie space. They left behind a species that would spend generations rebuilding with primitive tools, while automated satellites watched their every move. And the entire galaxy understood that a new power had emerged that would not tolerate certain behaviors. At the next session of the Galactic Council, Ambassador Catherine Wells returned to the human seat for the first time since the children were taken, and she placed a data crystal on the table that contained recordings of everything the Valkyrie had done to the children and everything humanity had done in response. I want every species in this council to watch these recordings, she said, her voice steady and strong. I want you to see what was done to our children. And I want you to see what we did to the species that harmed them. The chamber was silent as the recordings played, showing the horrors of the processing facility and the terrible precision of humanity's revenge. When the recordings ended, Ambassador Wells stood and looked at each representative in turn. We are a peaceful species, she said. We want to trade with you and learn from you and explore the galaxy alongside you as friends and partners. She paused, letting her words sink into the minds of every being present. But understand this. There is a line that must never be crossed. And every species here today needs to ask themselves one simple question before they interact with humanity in any way. Her eyes swept across the chamber one final time. Have you harmed human children? She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Because if the answer is yes, then say goodbye to your entire species. The council chamber remained silent for a very long time after she finished speaking. In the centuries that followed, the galaxy changed in ways that no one had predicted, and the Valkyrie precedent became the most important principle in interstellar politics. Human children became the safest beings in the known universe, protected not by laws or treaties, but by the certain knowledge of what would happen to anyone foolish enough to harm them. And criminals who even considered targeting human young were often turned in by members of their own species who feared attracting humanity's attention. The Valkyrie slowly rebuilt their civilization on their homeworld, watched over by silent human satellites. that would destroy any attempt to develop advanced technology. And each generation told their children the story of what had happened and why they must never make the same mistake again. And on the monument in their capital, the words remained visible for all to see, a reminder that some lines should never be crossed. This is what happens. The children of New Eden grew up and had children of their own, and they told stories about the dark time when they were taken and the light that came when humanity arrived to bring them home. Marcus Vance, Admiral Helena's grandson, became a diplomat who worked to build bridges between humans and other species. But he always carried with him the memory of what it felt like to be helpless and alone in a glass tube. "We should never have to do what my grandmother did," he said in one famous speech. "But we must always be willing to do it if necessary, because our children deserve to know that they will never be abandoned." The galaxy learned to respect humanity, not despite their love for their children, but because of it, understanding finally that what had seemed like weakness was actually the source of their greatest strength. And whenever a new species emerged into the galactic community, they were given a warning by the older civilizations: trade with the humans, learn from them, and become their friends if you can, but never, ever harm their children. Because if you do, you will discover that there is no force in the universe more dangerous than a human protecting what they love. The stars continued to shine, the galaxy continued to turn, and humanity continued to grow. But one truth remained constant throughout all the ages that followed: you do not touch the children.